Hello. This video reviews Act 1 of Shakespeare's play Macbeth. In our textbook, our selection begins on page 261. I have the online edition open in front of us here as we talk about the play. The play takes place in the 11th century, the 1050s, about 10 years before William the Conqueror invaded England. It opens on a note of foreboding. You notice it's really, really bad weather, and there are three witches that meet together. When shall we three meet again in thunder, lightning, or in rain? When the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won. So the Scottish are at war with Norway, and the witches decide they're going to meet with Macbeth when the war is over. So the very first time we hear his name mentioned, it's not in a very good light. It's with these witches. And then their familiars, Grey Malkin and Paddock, the cat and the toad, call the witches away. And then the witches say, and this is a major theme of the play, fair is foul and foul is fair. So all the way through the play, what seems good isn't good. Things that don't seem good maybe turn out to be good. Macbeth's very first line in the play is, so foul and fair a day I have not seen. So it imitates what these witches say right here. Scene 2 is a camp, a battle camp. The king notices there's a wounded soldier approaching, and his son Malcolm says that that's the man that saved my life a little while ago. And the captain basically just gives a big speech about how brave Macbeth is. So Macbeth is our tragic hero. We have to set him up as a hero first before he then falls. We don't get to see Macbeth very much at all as a hero. It's just other people reporting about how brave he is. The king is very quick to praise his cousin. Oh, valiant cousin. Oh, worthy gentleman. Cousin is sometimes a word that means a relative. Sometimes cousin is simply a word that means somebody who's a friend of yours. But actually they are related. The poor soldier's about ready to faint, so he asks for help. And the king says, yes, your words become you as your wounds. Get him to surgeons. And then we do have entering, at that point, Ross and Angus. Now, these noblemen are often named after their home counties. So Ross is the nobleman, or thane, they call it in Scotland, in charge of Ross County. Lennox is the nobleman in charge of Lennox County. Angus is in charge of Angus County. And so the king says, who comes here? And Malcolm, his son, says, the worthy thane of Ross. And Lennox says, what a haste looked through his eyes. God save the king. Where do you come from? From Fife, great king, where the Norwegian banners flout the sky and fan our people cold. Norway himself, with most terrible numbers, assisted by that most disloyal traitor, the Thane of Cawdor, began a dismal conflict. So the Scottish had a spy in their midst. One of their own thanes, one of their own powerful noblemen, was helping out Norway against his own king. Maybe Norway was going to put the Thane of Cawdor in charge of the country for him, maybe a puppet king. But they caught him at it. They've arrested him, and he's going to be executed. Ross comments that they would not even allow the Norwegian king to bury his men until he paid them some money to do it. Now, this Thane of Cawdor owned a huge territory. We call it a county today. So these counties of Scotland are controlled by these thanes. The king is more of a manager. He really cannot own the property. That was inherited by each thane from that thane's father and grandfather and great-grandfather and so forth. But the king can manage the land. So since Cawdor was a traitor, he's going to take it away from that family, but the king must award it to someone else. And he's going to award that county to Macbeth. Now, Macbeth already has a county. He already has a castle. Glamis, Glamis, is his territory. Now, he's going to have twice what he had before. The king's buttering up Macbeth, but there's a reason he's doing it. The king is planning to name his own son the heir to the throne. And back in those days, the council was supposed to get together and nominate somebody to be king. The king's going to bypass that and name his own son Malcolm to be the heir. He knows Macbeth would be the most likely choice to be the next king. So he figures if I give Macbeth enough land, if I'm nice to him, if I give him things, maybe he won't object when I name my son king. So there's a reason behind Duncan being so nice to Macbeth right here. Well, in scene 3, we're back with the witches again. Where have you been, sister? Killing pigs. Where have you been, sister? Well, a sailor's wife had some chestnuts, and I wanted some, and she wouldn't give me any. So I'm going to torment her husband. I'm going to fly over to Syria, where he is sailing, to Aleppo, and I'm going to stir up the weather. Now, these witches are more than just old ladies practicing kitchen magic. They're like elemental spirits in this play. They can fly, they can control weather, but they cannot kill. Notice what she says. While she tempts that woman's husband, she says, though his bark cannot be lost, yet it shall be tempest tossed. A bark is a boat. So she cannot kill the man, but she can really torment him. She can really test him. Now, that's very important. They cannot push somebody over the edge. They can tempt Macbeth, and they're going to tempt him to become king. But it's always up to Macbeth to take the bait or not. Well, the war is over. We remember that they were going to meet with Macbeth when the war was over. And here is his famous line, so foul and fair a day I have not seen. Because it's a foul day, it's bad weather, but it's a fair day because they won the war. And his best friend Banquo was there, and then poof, there are the witches right in front of them. And it's Banquo who's brave enough to walk right up to them. Macbeth may be brave on the battlefield, but he's terrified early on of anything supernatural. And Banquo says, oh, you look strange. You have little beards on, but I think you're women. Who are you? All hail, Macbeth. They totally ignore Banquo, and they turn to Macbeth. Hail to you, Thane of Glamis. Well, that's already his title. Hail to the Thane of Cawdor. Now, he has not received word yet that he has inherited that title. All hail, Macbeth, that shall be king hereafter. And Banquo says, why do you start and seem to fear things that sound so fair? So that gives us a little stage direction. Macbeth looks scared at this moment. Banquo doesn't seem to be scared. He says, hey, ladies, I'm Banquo. What about me? Having good news for me? And they say, oh, yes, hail to you too. Lesser than Macbeth, but greater. Not as happy, but happier. Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none. You will beget kings. Your descendants will be kings. But you yourself won't get to be a king. So, hail to both of you. Well, now Macbeth's gotten up his courage a little bit, and he says, now, wait a minute. My daddy was Sidle, and when he died, I became Thane of Glamis, but how am I going to be Thane of Cawdor? What are you talking about? I can't even be king. That's not even in my head to be king. Well, we learn later on, it was in his head to be king. He just doesn't want to admit it. And then poof, they're gone. And you notice the first thing Macbeth really centers on. He turns to Banquo. Your children shall be kings. And Banquo kind of laughs it off, says, yeah, but you're going to be the king, right, buddy? He says, yeah, they did say that, didn't they? And then all of a sudden, here comes Ross. Now, Ross is one of our thanes, one of our noblemen, but in our play, he almost acts like a messenger. Anytime somebody needs to know something, Ross shows up to give them the news. And he tells Macbeth about the Thane of Cawdor being a traitor, and the king has passed on that title and that county to Macbeth. Macbeth says, the Thane of Cawdor lives. Why do you dress me in borrowed robes? That borrowed robes is another theme or motif that we have in our play as well. And Angus says, well, that guy's going to be executed because he was a traitor. And then look what Macbeth says. The greatest is behind. In our language, we'd say the best is yet to come. He's thinking about becoming king somehow. And then Banquo warns him. Banquo says, you listen, it's strange. And oftentimes to win us to our harm, the instruments of darkness tell us truths, win us with honest trifles to betray us in deepest consequence. In other words, evil will show you just enough good to trap you. And so he warns his friend. Banquo has a wisdom that Macbeth later on tends to resent. Banquo tells the guys, new honors come upon him, like our strange garments. There's our borrowed robes again. Cleave not to their mold, but with the aid of use. Worthy Macbeth, we stay upon your leisure. So he is just overwrought, thinking about, I'm Thane of Cawdor now. I'm going to be king someday. How's that going to happen? And the other guys who are there like, are you coming with us or not? He says, oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, we'll go to the king. And that takes us then to scene 4. The king wonders, if execution has been done on Cawdor, as he says. And Malcolm, his son, comments, well, I didn't see it, but I heard some reports. Yes, he has been executed, but he was so noble when he died. He asked you, Father, to forgive him, not to let him off the hook, but just in your heart, to forgive him for what he did. He knew he was wrong, and he shouldn't have done it. And the king says, there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. He was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust. We'd say you can't judge a book by its cover. But then the king does not follow his own advice. In walks Macbeth, and the king falls all over him, praising him. Oh, worthiest cousin! And Macbeth has a nice little speech where he says, well, everything I do is for you, sir. And then the king notices Banquo is there. You notice Banquo hasn't received any reward for doing anything. And he was just as brave as Macbeth was. So the king says, oh, noble Banquo, you deserve something too. And look what the king gives Banquo. Let me enfold thee and hold thee to my heart. Now he's just given Macbeth a new castle, a new county, which means all the tax money from that county will go to Macbeth. What does Banquo get? Banquo gets a hug. The only difference is that's all Banquo expects. Whatever he does, he says he does as the king's man. That's his duty. And he doesn't expect anything else. And then the king says, well, since I have everybody together, I'm going to name the heir to the throne, and that is my son Malcolm. I name him Prince of Cumberland. And Macbeth gets off by himself, and he says, Prince of Cumberland, that's a step on which I must fall down or else overleap, for in my way it lies. Stars, hide your fires. Let not light see my black and deep. He is thinking about killing the king already, and now he's got two people to get rid of, the son and the king. Scene 5, Lady Macbeth has received a letter from her husband. We thought he was ambitious. We haven't seen anything yet. She's really ambitious. She wants to become queen. But she's afraid her husband, she says, is not mean enough to do it. A messenger comes in, says the king is coming there tonight to have supper. She says, you're crazy to say that. No, ma'am, he's coming here tonight. And so she is planning to do this evil deed herself. She even has a prayer here to evil spirits to make her mean like a man. She says, unsex me here and fill me from the crown to the toe top full of direst cruelty. So she says, make me mean like a man, not like a gentlewoman, and I will kill the king myself. No, that's not the way it happens. But at this point, she's thinking about it. Macbeth comes in. She says, when's the king going to leave? He says, tomorrow. She says, he won't live to see tomorrow. And Macbeth looks scared. She says, don't do that. You've got to put on a false face and let everybody think everything's fine while the king comes here to visit. But we'll take care of it. Scene 6, the king comes in. Banquo is sometimes long-winded, makes some comment about a bird singing. And the king wonders why Macbeth didn't come to greet him. Well, Macbeth is scared to see the king. But Lady Macbeth puts on that false face very easily, and she comes in to welcome the king. And then the king says, conduct me to my host. We love him highly and shall continue our graces toward him. And then scene 7 is a very, very important scene. It is the first scene that we have that has a soliloquy where Macbeth is alone, and it's a long speech. And in this speech, he tries to convince himself not to kill the king. He says, I am his subject. I am his cousin. He said, I would be committing the sin of Judas if I did this. Now notice what we have here. It's basically Duncan's Last Supper. And so that makes Duncan the Christ figure, but it makes Macbeth Judas. And Macbeth knows it. So he knows he will go to hell if he kills the king. And he decides, I'm not going to do it. He's here in double trust. I'm his kinsman and his subject, and I'm his host. A host is responsible for the safety of the guests. So he decides not to do it until his wife comes in. And he tells her they're not going to do it, and she shames him. And so he goes along. He says, oh, well, okay, I guess we can go ahead and kill the king. And so that was Duncan's Last Supper. And she says, tighten up your courage. And so they're planning to drug the guards outside of Duncan's bedroom and then go in there and kill the king. So that's a review of Act 1 of Macbeth.